doing tonight's introduction. Trish Rogers is a partner at a Denver law firm, Moy White. Trish has been a longtime friend of Silicon Flatirons. She's on our entrepreneurship advisory board. She's also a supervising attorney for free. She volunteers her time to help our entrepreneurial law clinic attorneys, who in turn provide free help to area startups. And additionally, Trish has been actively involved with Watson and Unreasonable over the years. Delighted to have Trish come and do the intro for tonight. Trish?
Yeah, Trish.
Thank you, fan club. Appreciate it. So I don't have to introduce myself, which is great. But what I am going to do before I introduce our guest speakers for this evening, I've been asked to talk a little bit about Silicon Flatirons, which I am happy to do. You've heard a lot about events going on already tonight, sponsored by Silicon Flatirons, and I'm hoping this is a refresher for most of you. But what Silicon Flatirons is housed here at the law school, but it has a mission to promote innovation across campus and through the community, and also to promote thought leadership within the community and across campus. And it does this by really helping students focus on becoming leaders in 3 areas: law, technology, policy, and entrepreneurship. It does this by connecting students with leaders in the community in those areas as mentors, by having programs like the ones tonight and other sponsored programs coming up, by aligning itself with other entrepreneurial initiatives in the community like Techstars and Startup Colorado and Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network, and really connecting with the community that way. And then by having kind of student-only programs such as the New Venture Challenge that was mentioned tonight, and a Tech Accelerator during the summer, and then Startup Summer as well, among other programs. If you're interested in finding out more, and even more importantly, if you are willing to get involved, which I hope all of you are, please check out the website siliconflatirons.org. My recommendation on the website is to start with my favorite link, which is the top right-hand corner of the website. It's called Donate. So start there and then make your way through the rest of the website, and I really do hope everyone participates. So one of the things that Silicon Flatirons is really good at is building community. And that's what our 2 guest speakers share tonight as well. They're really great at building community. But that's not all that they have in common. I'm not going to mention the mustache. However, so Daniel and Eric both started their first social ventures before the age of 20. Think about what you were doing before you turned 20. They both had already started social ventures helping other people in the world, which is great. Before they turned 30, both of them were listed on one of Forbes' top 30 under 30 entrepreneurs lists. Right? It's great. Daniel also was one of Inc. magazine's top 30 under 30 entrepreneurs, and another entrepreneur slightly older than him, you may have heard of him, Richard Branson, had the honor to share with Daniel one year being named top entrepreneur of the world by the Global Entrepreneurship Initiative. Similarly, before he was 30, Eric was already an Ashoka Fellow, an Echo and Green Fellow, and had won an International Humanitarian Award from the UN's Boulder chapter, which is great. But that's not all they have in common. And I'm not going to go through everything that they have in common, including the facial hair, but I do want to talk about 3 things in particular that these guys share, and it'll lead into the discussion tonight. First, they both believe that entrepreneurship is the answer to our planet's most pressing problems. Second, they believe that solving these problems involves winning the hearts and minds of our next generation and making sure that that generation is better educated than the one before it. And third, they believe some of the best ideas in the world come from those with the least resources. And there are many of us here, I'm sure, who share those beliefs. I'm one of them. But what differentiates Daniel and Eric from most of us, and we'll hear a lot more about this tonight, is that they've both created incredible programs via Watson University and Unreasonable Group that gives access to young entrepreneurs, often impoverished young entrepreneurs, to an entrepreneurial education, and these young entrepreneurs get access to an education because they have the best ideas to solve the world's most pressing problems. And these two have created these programs to help these young entrepreneurs really solve our problems for us. So it's ground-up education. And with that, please join me in welcoming two of my heroes, Eric Glustrom and Daniel Epstein. Thank you.
Really generous introduction.
Yeah, you know, there's like all-time quarterback when you're a little kid on the playground. You're going to turn into all-time introducer here soon. That was great. All right, so I want to baseline conversation by starting with the current incarnation of your ventures. Eric, why don't you start with Watson, then Daniel, Unreasonable. Just make sure that everybody knows what it is that you're doing.
For sure. Good evening. Thanks for having us. Trish, thanks for the amazing introduction. Probably the best one I've ever received. You know. So really a pleasure to be here. Watson is a new university model here in Boulder, based up in Chautauqua Park, for young entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. So we're fortunate to have a good crew of the Watson scholars here tonight. Bunch of hooligans, really. You know. You can talk to them afterwards about what they're doing. But Watson is really based on the belief that the people with the most potential to solve some of the most pressing challenges we face are those currently within the walls of higher education institutions. But if you look at the higher education system, it's really not designed or tailored to maximize or optimize around the impact that the next generation can create throughout their lives. The purpose is something fundamentally different. And we said if we're going to solve these problems, we need to address this first fundamental challenge of what the education system is set up to do. So we created Watson to provide a model tailored for young entrepreneurs, young innovators, young leaders to really amplify the impact they can create. Each element of the experience at Watson is different than what you think of as a traditional higher education model, and we can talk more about that, but we're excited to be entering our 5th year and also to call Boulder home.
How many students in the class?
We choose 24 students each semester.
Okay, and what mix of domestic, international students, what's that look like?
We're half international, half domestic, and amazing diversity. It's hard to find a group of 24 people with more diversity in one group, really from all over the world, working on all different types of issue areas, but they're all united by this common passion they have for making the world a better place for themselves and for future generations too.
Living up at Chautauqua?
All living at Chautauqua. Team, scholars, that's where we hold all the workshops, so we rent our campus from Chautauqua.
Awesome. Daniel?
Really impressive.
Just like your mustache. Yeah.
Thanks, Glusty. So we were also roommates for a couple of years and best friends. He actually married one of our fellows.
That is true.
So there's a lot here that we have a lot of fun with, that's all. My mustache, I grew it just to throw him off. So I think it's important to start by rationalizing a seemingly irrational name and then getting into that. So why are we called Unreasonable? It's inspired by the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. He's famous for saying that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world, the unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. In essence, if George Bernard Shaw is right, if all progress depends on the unreasonable individual, then in a world where I think most of us know these statistics, but 1.3 billion people don't have access to electricity, 770 million people don't have access to clean drinking water. And in the world we live in today, we can't afford not to bet on unreasonable individuals. So what we do at the Unreasonable Group is we scour the globe, similar to Watson, and we handpick and we privately invite entrepreneurs who we think are the most unreasonable entrepreneurs of our generation. These are people who look at the status quo and see something much more profound. They are doing things that most of us would think would be impossible. What we do, we have right now 89 entrepreneurs within our global network in our portfolio, and we try to give them an unfair advantage so they can scale faster. I think a differentiator, I think we share the same values. A differentiator between Watson and Unreasonable is stage of company and kind of age of entrepreneur that we induct into the network. We're really focused on scaling what works. So if we want to solve the world's grand challenges faster, we think that part of that is finding the most effective entrepreneurial solutions on the planet and then giving them, turbocharging them, giving them an unfair advantage. So across the 89 entrepreneurs, They've now raised about $3 billion in financing across that cohort. They've generated about $1 billion in revenue. They're impacting individuals in 185 countries. And the most important statistic there is they're directly impacting about 250 million lives around the world with their products or services. So this is from ultra-affordable DNA diagnostics in Argentina to distributed solar to replace kerosene across India, sub-Saharan Africa, to hydrogen cell-powered vehicles in the UK. They're all trying to solve incredibly hard problems, and we're trying to help them do it further, farther, faster.
Maybe you can deepen that a little bit. So one of the companies that you guys are behind is trying to address the problem of honor killings in Pakistan.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When you guys get involved, what do you bring to the table for that company, and what size company or what range of size a company are you getting engaged with?
So that's from with Unreasonable Institute when we were looking at earlier stage entrepreneurs. But that's Khalida Brohi is the entrepreneur. You guys know Khalida?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, cool.
Master course teacher at
amazing.
Watson.
She's the best,
She's
right?
amazing.
I think she'll win a Nobel Prize someday
Yes.
for what she does. She's put her life on the line multiple times. When the accident or the kind of the tragedy with Malala, when she got shot, there were two people targeted by the Taliban that day. It was Khalida and Malala. Khalida's offices actually got bombed. Nobody was in the office that day. She was really lucky. She had just taken them out front, literally, and then it blew up. She's an entrepreneur who literally risks her life to see the change that she wants to have happen in the world. I think how we support entrepreneurs like Khalida is there's really two things. Part of it is a sense of community. The journey of being on the front lines, trying to do things that is against cultural norms or that everybody else thinks is impossible, it's incredibly hard. And the level of stress that some of our entrepreneurs go through, it's literally to the point of paralysis. Like quite literally, actually, Khalida was in the hospital, paralyzed for about a month. That's how much stress she had. It's very real. And so part of what we do is we help entrepreneurs seek refuge amongst, in essence, we say fellow misfits, other entrepreneurs who are kind of foolhardy enough to believe they can change the world, but they're so hell-bent they're never going to stop at anything short of it. And there aren't a lot of people who fit into that category. And the reason it's partially called unreasonable is most of these entrepreneurs, their whole lives, everybody tells them that what they're doing is completely unreasonable. It'll never work. And so for the first time ever, they get to be amongst a community where they can really seek refuge in that camaraderie. I think the other thing we do is we talk about wanting to be a white glove service for the entrepreneurs, like a concierge into any door they'd ever want to get into. So you might, so we do quarterly calls with all the entrepreneurs into perpetuity. And on that call, an entrepreneur like Khalida, she may say, hey, we're looking to build up our board of directors. We'd love somebody who's an executive from USAID. We'll say, great, through the network, we'll connect you to 4 executives at USAID. Another entrepreneur may say, I'm struggling desperately with work-life balance, and my family is suffering because of it, and that's what's most important to me, but I can't figure it out. We'll say, great, we're going to connect you to this executive coach and this relationship psychologist. Another entrepreneur is going to say, I'm raising $100 million around fusion energy. Who's out there who can fund it? And we say, well, great, we can connect you into Malaysia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, who's the key funders. In essence, so part of it is you seek refuge amongst each other. There's a strong kinship and kind of bond that actually gives you courage to keep going. The other aspect of that is let's open up any door you ever want access into. So at the end of the day, we think business is all about relationships. And if we can broker those faster, so much more can happen.
All right, so super helpful as to what you guys are on to now. I want to wind you backwards. We've got some Watson scholars who are students here. How many other students here tonight? All right, so lots of folks. All right, so one of the fascinating things that you guys share that Trish teed up is you started new ventures really early. And pick whatever you consider to be the first significant new venture that you tried to launch and tell us that story. Eric?
Definitely. And so much of my motivation for Watson comes from this exact story. So I went to high school here in Boulder at Fairview High School. I don't know if there's any folks from Fairview here, but it was my junior year of high school, and a mentor, a wonderful woman named Angela Timondino, who I know Brad and a bunch of the CU folks know well. So I was 17 years old. Angela was on the board of Amnesty International at the time. She's someone who's played a huge role in my life. She was a mentor before I knew what a mentor was. She now teaches at Watson, so the scholars get a chance to get to know her too. And she helped inspire me to create this trip to a refugee community in Western Uganda with the goal of originally making a film about what life was like on the other side of the world to bring it back to Fairview High School, which is, for those of you who know, we're a very privileged public school, right? There's not a lot of diversity at Fairview. One, people to see what life was like on the other side of the world, and I wanted to learn that too, because I didn't know what that was like. And so went over there with the goal of making a film, convinced my parents that it was safe enough, and barely convinced my parents that it was safe enough, and came back with a newfound passion for education, because I met a group of young refugees from the Congo, the Eastern DRC, who had fled over to Uganda and still have an incredibly powerful vision to solve the conflict in the Congo. And I asked them, I said, well, I'm just a high school kid in the US, but what can I do to help? If anyone's going to solve this extremely complex challenge in the Congo that's led to more deaths than any war since World War II, it's you all. You know it better than anyone else, and you're more motivated than anyone else. I said, what can I do to help? Not thinking I would be able to do much, and they responded by saying, if you really want to help our community and if you want to help our country, then help us receive an education. Because with an education, we will be better able to solve these problems. And I have never thought about education the same way. The purpose of an education before that moment was we go to middle school so we can go to high school. We go to high school, since we're lucky, we can go to college, and then we get a job. That was what education was all about. And then they said those words, and I was like, wow, education is a whole lot more than that, right? Education should really be an investment in the next generation that pays off for them, but also pays off for the rest of the world, and allows future generations to live in a better place. And so I started an organization called Educate. The goal was to fulfill that vision and develop a new generation of leaders from East Africa able to solve these problems. Throughout high school and then college, I built up Educate as a student, and it became my full-time job when I graduated. And one thing I learned, and we can go into this more, is that all the work I was doing on Educate happened from midnight till 2 a.m. while I was in college or during the summers. And I look back on that, and it's definitely what I'm most passionate about. It's absolutely what I've learned the most from, and it's theoretically what has made the most impact in the world. So today I'm on the board of Educate, and we reach over 300,000 students across East Africa and have changed the national education system of Uganda and Rwanda. And I look back and I'm like, if this is what I was so passionate about and what I learned the most from, why was it not even an extracurricular activity while I was in school? It was an extracurricular activity. It happened after the extracurricular activities were done, but it became my career, right? And it's also what I learned the most from. Isn't that what school should be all about, is building your future life and your career and what you're going to do with your working years? And so as we were getting Watson started, I said, I know there are more young entrepreneurs who are passionate about solving these problems. And if we can give them a chance to experiment with those ideas, dive into them full time, get mentorship, get training, have a community, just like Daniel said, of people who are going to protect their courage, right? That's our motto, is protect your courage. The community protects their courage because it takes a lot of courage as any entrepreneur, and especially a young entrepreneur, to when people are doubting the path that they're on, saying, this is definitely not the traditional path, this isn't even the road less traveled, you guys are trailblazing a new road, right? It takes a lot of courage to keep going down that path. And so can't we create an experience and an environment where those types of passionate entrepreneurial individuals come together and actually get to build out the ideas that they're passionate about?
All right, so I want to circle back to the Educate story here momentarily, but Daniel, do you have something that didn't go quite as well the first time? Because if not, I'm going to inject something. What was your first venture?
From now on, you have to ask me the question first, then Eric follows. I'm in awe of that. It's amazing. We lived together for 2 years. I never actually heard the story.
He's too busy making fun of his mustaches and whatnot, so, you know. Actually, every company I started in university ended up failing in one way or another. If you play that timeline out long enough. First company, much less noble. I was an out-of-state student, and in my first year there was 2 companies we started, but I'll pick kind of the easier one. So I was an out-of-state student, out-of-state tuition. Who here is an out-of-state student? I'm just curious. It's expensive, right? Yeah. It's wildly expensive compared to in-state tuition. And when I was visiting universities,
came out of University of Colorado and learned that 1% of out-of-state students at that time got in-state tuition. So I figured, well, I'm not going to come here unless I can get in-state tuition. I went into the bursar's office, I think it was the bursar's office, and said, can you get in-state tuition? What's the process? And they said, well, only 1% of students ever get it out of state. I said, well, what's the process? And they handed me this booklet. And reading through the booklet, it's actually, it wasn't that hard. It was just intentionally confusing. That's how I'd put it. Because of course, it's not necessarily good for the university for out-of-state students to start paying in-state tuition in terms of dollars. And so I read through it and realized it's just complicated, but it's actually simple. You needed to prove emancipation and domicile. Emancipation, financial independence from your guardians, domicile, intent to live in Colorado. So there's a checklist of 40 things you do, and then you get in-state. And so by the end of my first year, I had in-state tuition. And I was, I guess this is kind of illegal because we're 18 or 19, but we were having some beers in the dorms. And I was with 3 friends, and they're all out-of-state students. And I said, hey, I got in-state tuition. This is amazing. You guys should do this too. And they all said, yeah, that's a great idea, but it's too hard. Only 1% ever get it. And you got lucky. And I was like, no, I didn't get lucky. Here's how I did it. Here's the work. And they said, well, no, maybe you're smart or whatever that was. And I said, no, that's not it, I swear. And they wouldn't do it. And I was like, you guys are nuts. And I said, so I'll make you a deal. I'll help you get in-state tuition. If you get in-state tuition, give me 10% of what you save. And immediately that was a company. And I think a lot of first companies, right? It's a good business. This is a win-win-win proposition. Out-of-state students who are paying out-of-state tuition, who would do this? Exactly. Since then, the company actually had to shut down because of change in state laws for getting in-state tuition, which did happen. And there's some more, it's so less noble than what you're just saying, because we decided to target where's the highest concentration of out-of-state students within the university, and we realized there was sorority girls. And it literally is. And so we used to go into sorority houses and we'd pitch what was called tuition specialists, and all of their dads loved us, right? And so. But it's the perfect college startup in a way. What happened is about maybe a year into it, I started to not like the company because I realized that there was a loser in the business model. And I was obsessed with business models that were, I would say, thrivable, not sustainable, but thrivable. Because every single constituency that touches it benefits. And if everything benefits, then it's going to grow. And so I can't remember his name, but it was head of admissions or the bursar's office, and reached out to him and said, I want to meet with you. I'm one of the people, one of the co-founders of Tuition Specialists, who they all didn't really like. And came in and sat down with him, and I told him, I said, I'm not comfortable with this because I know you're losing in this situation, in this scenario. And he said, hey, you don't have to tell me this. He's like, you guys keep doing your thing. Like, it's great. I'm for it, the university, but I'm for it personally. I said, no. I said, we have to find a way that you benefit from this. And in talking through it, we realized 2 things, that out-of-state students, the university really struggled in getting out-of-state diversity to come onto the campus. And that was because they were typically targeting very affluent schools out of state, and those tended to be demographics that were mostly Caucasian. And so we said, well, this is amazing, because we can almost 100% guarantee in-state tuition, so let's go into inner city schools, and we did, and let's tell students that if they want to come to the University of Colorado, we can get them in-state tuition, make it much more affordable after the first year. Same thing for out-of-state talent. If you're going to pay, $40,000, or let's say, I think it was $28,000 a year, and you were really, really smart, you'd probably go to Stanford, right? And so we were able to go and recruit really high levels of talent, being able to say, hey, you can pay actually much lower rates and come to Colorado. And so we were able to take not a competitor, but somebody who didn't like what we were doing and turn them into an ally. And then the university was actually marketing on our behalf to get more students to get in-state tuition because we were recruiting the type of students they couldn't normally get. And so it shows like win-win-win-win-win business models can thrive if you can stumble upon them. The state then changed the laws, and so we had to shut it down like a year and a half ago.
Regulatory risk will be another.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing.
In the spring. Yeah. I actually want to follow up on that, and Erica, interested in your thoughts on this too, which is, Daniel, I've always thought you could sell sand in the desert. All right? I mean, going back to the first time that I saw you and the Unreasonable team pitch, I mean, you've always had unusual sales skills. But going back to your time as an undergrad and your time in high school, talk a little bit about what was it like to talk to people who are professionals, probably 20, 30 years older at least, and in what ways was youth an advantage while you're trying to get these ventures off the way, and at what ways was it a real challenge that you had to overcome?
Yeah, great question. I was talking to a CU student today. I think he's a sophomore, and he was wondering how do you start a company in university. And I actually think there's no better time. Anybody here is a student, especially if you're at Watson, especially. But there's no better time to start a company. And that's because everybody wants you to succeed. You're not a threat in any way. You're not competitive in any way. And so yeah, I found it as an asset to be a student, that I could reach out to anybody in the community. Yeah, literally anybody, and say, hey, I'm a student at CU Boulder. I have this idea. We're trying to make higher education more affordable. Can I meet with you? I would love to pick your brain. I'd love to tell you more about what we're doing. Nobody says no to that. Literally nobody. And they actually all want to help you succeed. And talking to the student today on the phone, he was like, well, how did you recruit your team? So, well, you work with your friends. Of course. But the amazing thing about a university campus is there are classes here where there's a marketing class, there's an advertising class, there's a financing class, there's an accounting class, there's all of those. So go to the professor, ask the professor, hey, I have a startup idea. I'd love to present it to your students and see if there's any allies here who can join my team. You get free labor that's incredibly talented and hungry, and you get a podium in front of them. Like it's such an opportunity that so few students seem to seize, because most of them, to Eric's point, the educational model is I go here to do really well, academically, and then I get my job. But as an entrepreneur, this is incredibly fertile ground, because I think you'll find so much support. I didn't find much pushback, and that could be because I'm a little bit oblivious to it as well. Like there might be a warped perspective here. I think if somebody told me no, that was in essence kind of probably more motivating. But I do remember being intimidated to sit in rooms with almost anybody for probably 2 years. If I was trying to do a partnerships meeting or a sales meeting, I remember being very intimidated, short of breath, sweaty, like mouth dry, all those types of things. And one of our mentors, and we both know him really well, his name's Tom Chi, just an amazing entrepreneur and designer, led the design team with Google Glass and the self-driving car and all that stuff. He had a great analogy for entrepreneurship. He said, look, entrepreneurship is like riding a bike. It's like the only way, you can't learn how to ride a bike by reading about it or talking about it. The only way to learn how to ride a bike is to get on the bike and pedal. He's like, and fall over and get back up and pedal, fall over, get back up and pedal. And for me, kind of getting over those insecurities, because I absolutely had them, it just took 100 meetings. And after you do it 100 times, you realize it's not that bad, and then you shed that. But it was hard for a couple years.
Eric, you had the additional issue as you're building on Educate of not just age, but also culture, that you're having collaboration. The collaboration in order to work is with individuals who are from a different culture than the one you grew up in. Yeah,
definitely. And I think, I absolutely agree with Epstein on this. I think it's an advantage, and I think it's a disadvantage. Yep. And I think it's, if anything, it's an advantage externally. And all of entrepreneurship is partially an external challenge to overcome, and then largely an internal challenge to overcome. And I think where it gets hard is, as young entrepreneurs, the disadvantage is on the internal side. Because the self-doubt is just so crushing and so overwhelming when, again, it's not even the road less traveled. It is trailblazing. It is creating a new road. And I think as young entrepreneurs, we just don't know whether this is the right path or not. And I think that stays true later on, but it's absolutely true and accentuated when we're younger. And I remember walking into the offices of the government of Uganda, trying to convince them to incorporate our curriculum into their system. And we have no qualifications to be doing this, except for the evidence that our model was working, which is maybe the most important qualification. But if you look at anything else, we were not qualified to be doing that. And it takes a lot of courage, and ultimately that's where the community of other misfits, of other young entrepreneurs, that's what it's all about. And so having that courage and really strengthening that courage is absolutely key.
Whether with Educator Watson, what has been the moment of the greatest self-doubt?
Ongoing, absolutely ongoing. Yeah, I don't know if it ends.
You doubting yourself?
Does it end? Yeah, exactly. I don't know if it ends. It's one of those things where it's not necessarily a fun path. But the highs are going to be higher than anything else, and the purpose, the why behind it is absolutely what I believe is the most important why. And so that trumps all of that uncertainty, all of that doubt, because we know we're doing this for an important reason, for a worthwhile reason. And the highs, the impact and the highs that you see are amazing, but the stress grows and evolves and changes, but it does not go away, at least in my life. And I think, Epstein would probably say the same. He's a bit better at being like oblivious to the stress than I am. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny. Doubt, stress is something I feel. Doubt is not something that I've actually ever felt, which is, it could just be semantics. It could just be a definition of doubt. But I've never really felt it. I feel uncertainty. But the moment I see uncertainty, then I look at it and try to dissect it and find the first step that you can get to make that more certain. And oftentimes that's calling somebody who's already done it or prototyping something really quickly. I've never, it's a funny thing, I've never related to the sense of doubt. And I don't know what that is. And sometimes that's really dangerous. And that strength is definitely a weakness. Is it always hard? Yeah, I think it's always hard. If you're always trying to scale it, if you're always trying to have more impact and you don't feel like you're ever going to settle on that, it's always hard.
Early years of Unreasonable Institute, there's a strong educational emphasis. So Unreasonable at the start is one of the first social entrepreneurship accelerators. You're bringing in 10 or so companies living together in a fraternity house, which was the house over on the hill?
Yep.
Which one was it?
Oh no, we had a couple. They tore down. So the one they were in the first 2 years, they actually tore that one down. There was like a asbestos spread. Actually, that mentor Tom Chi, I don't know if I could, if you want to go to these stories, but so he's an amazing individual and very well known. Helped create Yahoo Search, created Yahoo Answers, helped build Outlook, then ran Google X, Google Glass, self-driving, all these things. And we brought him out as a mentor and put him into a room in this dilapidated fraternity house that was vacant in the summertime. And he tells the story of he was sleeping, and he's Buddhist, so he's a pacifist with kind of killing things, right? So he's sleeping and he feels something kind of crawl up his neck, and he kind of grabs it. He's really tired though, and he throws it across the room. And then 10 seconds later, it's on his foot, and he's like, this bug is really fast, so he reaches down, grabs it, and throws it across the room. And then 10 seconds later, it's on his head, and he's like, what is this bug? And he must be flying or something, and he throws it, and then he feels it again, and then he turns on the light, and his room was infested with cockroaches. And so we paid the equivalent of $4.50 a night per person in that house. So just to put that in perspective, because we had no money. Every fully bootstrapped, to the bootstrapped, maxed on credit cards, everything, right? And just found a system where fraternity houses and sorority houses are vacant in the summertime. And so it's an unused asset. And so if you can convince somebody to let you use it, we could do that. So first 2 summers we're in that fraternity house, they tore it down. It was right over there. And then we moved into what used to be a sorority house, which is much nicer. I highly recommend that. And then that became a fraternity house. And then it really went downhill from there. It's true. It's true.
I want to talk a little bit about the educational aspects of how you approach it. And so, Eric, why don't you talk about, with respect to Watson, you highlighted that ultimately you're training problem solvers. How do you go about doing that? And to the extent that you're differentiated from other educational options, where's the secret sauce?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think without a doubt, I always say Watson is definitely not for everybody, right? So we select a very specific type of student who's on a specific path. And there's some parents of Watson scholars here in the audience too. And so I would love to hear what it's like to raise these amazing individuals who've now gone on to do tremendous things, right? But if you want to be a doctor, then you go to medical school and you go to a specialized program, right? But there's not necessarily that specialized program tailored for young social entrepreneurs. And so we wanted to design that from scratch. Thanks to the work of Daniel and many others, there's a lot of evidence around what works when it comes to supporting entrepreneurs. But no one had necessarily taken that model and adapted it into the higher education system. And so we said, let's make this degree bearing. let's enable students for the first time in history to earn their bachelor's degree for actually building a venture, knowing that that's how they're going to grow the most and how they're going to make the most impact in the world for this specific type of student. And so from scratch, we said, okay, classrooms are going to look a lot different. It's going to be filled with peers who are just as passionate as you are about solving a specific problem. The professors are going to look a lot different. Absolutely practitioners, people who have been there before, who have done it, who have faced these challenges, who have really trailblazed their own paths. And then we
I don't like it. I don't like it.
And then we, I know you do. And then we bring in master course teachers who are folks like Tom Chi, or Saturday we have an incredible individual, Jerry White, coming to campus, who led the international campaign to ban landmines and worked with Princess Diana to make sure there's more landmines coming out of the earth than going into the earth, and co-received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work. And he's going to be leading a master course, and it's not a guest lecture. It's a small group workshop where you're getting in intimate conversation with someone like Jerry, who has devoted his life to this specific problem. And then after the workshop, there's mentorship sessions. So you're getting to work in small groups with these individuals. They're almost like short-term entrepreneurs in residence, because ask anyone who's running a program to support entrepreneurs, and that's what works, right? That's what's important, but we don't find that very often in higher ed. We're also changing the financial model. We're changing the campus structure. Watson's vision is to create a network of small campuses in 50 key cities around the world, rather than one large campus in one location, because our students come from all over the world, and the work they're doing is really globally embedded. I mean, last semester, Saurabh's co-founder comes from Nepal, but is doing work with smallholder women coffee farmers in Costa Rica to enable them to brand, sell, and distribute their product directly to consumers here in the US. That is a global citizen with a global vision, and rather than studying in one place, they need to be able to go through their education embedded in these communities and learning from mentors who know those local contexts, as well as from the beneficiaries. So we're really trying to take every element of the experience and then rethink it from scratch. And what would that look like?
Have you seen yourself as engaged in education? So maybe you could say a word about Unreasonable at Sea, which was explicitly about education, but talk a little bit about the accelerator days as well.
Yeah, I want to go to Watson. This is so cool. So just kind of our take on education, in essence.
Well, did you see, for example, early days of Unreasonable Institute, Accelerator, did you see it as entrepreneurial education?
Yes, especially the pilot, so what we call the Global Leadership Institute. So we ran that, we just being friends, co-founders who are also students at CU. A co-founder of that, his name is Mike Forte. He was just a really good friend, amazing doctor, horrible co-founder, but we made it through it, and I love him to death. And so we started this thing called the Global Leadership Institute, and that was largely inspired from a frustration that I was experiencing with education, which is I felt like all of my classes were issues focused. I knew everything about every ism, racism, classism, sexism, I mean, like everything, terrorism, right? Like all of these classes were focused on that. And there was so much potential energy within the room of students. Like so many of us wanted to do something about it. But that was never turned kinetic. We never said, yes, we care about this and let's do something about this. It's just we stopped with the yes, we care about this section. And so Global Leadership Institute was absolutely a product that I wanted to exist for myself at the time that didn't. And so we kind of had to co-create it. And it was a place for, some were students, some weren't students. I think the age, Paul was there. I think the average age was probably like 25 or so, maybe 24. And most people had kind of just left university for the most part, and they were incredibly hungry to have a different type of experience. Where I said, yes, we know you care. Now let's figure out what can work. And that was absolutely a backlash from my own educational experience, wanting to look at solutions, not just understand problems. You have to understand the problems, absolutely. I don't think the best way you learn how to understand problems is in the classroom, though. I think that's in market to gain real empathy. And we have an expression, we say empathy builds empires in terms of companies. So how do you get the deepest sense of empathy? You come from the markets you're operating in, or you start the companies in those markets while you're there, and it's all kind of outside of the classroom. We've changed our model a lot, though, because a lot of that was curriculum driven. So we had 2 professors to that point, trying to kind of give the skills and the courage to be able to start something. Since then, there's a quote. Einstein has a really good quote because he was a professor, and at some point, I'm sure somebody asked him, how do you teach? And he said, I don't teach my students, I create the conditions in which they learn. And I think for entrepreneurship, people talk about, are you made an entrepreneur, can you be taught, or are you born? And I think it's actually the wrong question. The question is, what are the conditions in which entrepreneurship thrives? And we need to focus our efforts, and that's what we do, is on creating those conditions. And so from us, we went from a curriculum model to a process model. And the process was about creating more productive collisions that wouldn't normally happen between ideas and people. It's all about the conditions. So the one-on-ones, the mentorship. We've run things called brain trusts, all these types of things, but there's no curriculum element. The only person who runs a workshop at one of our gatherings now is actually Tom Chi. But his workshop's all about experimental. It's all about learn by doing. It's not teaching.
How does that track or not with your curricular approach?
Definitely. I think, we're a different stage, so we're slightly earlier stage, younger entrepreneurs. We also want to make sure they can earn their degree, right? That's key for us, and the key innovation we're bringing. So we've packaged that type of experience into 23 credit courses, which gets put at the center of a student's Watson experience. And they're getting credit for both building the fundamental elements of an early stage venture, from a 1 to 2 pager, which the class this morning was focused on, to actually building a team through a workshop we have called Transformative Team that, if you ask any entrepreneur, I think the biggest challenge they'd say is usually a team issue. If we can solve the team issues, then the external challenges we're trying to solve usually come together. But the team is so complex and so hard, whether it's a co-founder issue or growing a team, people are just complex, right? And yet if you look at the majority of business schools, they don't actually hit on that significant, probably most significant challenge that entrepreneurs face. How do you actually build and strengthen a team? And so the class Transformative Team goes into that. So we have found a way to give credit for going through these experiences that, yes, there's a curriculum, there's a syllabus, there's deliverables, but it looks very different than a traditional classroom. And that's at the core of students' experience. And then on the side, surrounding that to support it, is what we would normally think of as the core curriculum. The general education requirement. So rather than the core curriculum being at the core, we've put that on the side to really provide a foundation and support for what our students are most passionate about, which is building these ideas.
So let me anticipate what the objection might be from a more traditionalist perspective. That is, the world that students are going into is going to rapidly change. Yes, entrepreneurship, and here I'm going to characterize a little bit. It's a buzzword, it's a trend, and great that you're giving these people experiences, but you need a foundation of understanding about the world that's broad-based, that is something that will be something that they can draw upon as the world changes going forward, to which you say?
So a lot of thoughts on it. It's a great question. I'm a big believer in the liberal arts. So I went to a liberal arts institution. I'm a huge believer in it. I had to talk with a great guy in town, Rick White, who's on the board of a liberal arts college out east. And he was saying how one of the decisions they had to make was whether or not to spend an extra $100,000+ to have 2 professors of different disciplines in the same classroom for most of the classes in one semester. So $100,000 for maybe a total of 25 hours of students' time, where there's 2 extremely well-paid professors from different disciplines. I fully believe in interdisciplinary thinking, without a doubt, but I do question whether or not that money could have been used for an experience which actually brought the students somewhere where they're experiencing these issues firsthand and learning from them in a truly interdisciplinary setting, not in an interdisciplinary theoretical setting. Right? And so I think I'm absolutely a believer in the liberal arts, and yes, we need to teach people how to think and also who they are. The original word for university is finding our place in the universe, right? That's where the word comes from. Half of Watson's curriculum is focused on personal development, is focused on personal growth, and scholars come in saying, I thought I was going to come out with just hard skills and an advanced venture, and the most valuable thing I came out with was I grew tremendously as an individual, and absolutely that's a foundation that we have to lay. I question whether it's being done with the optimized return on investment currently within higher education.
want to talk a little bit about innovation around your business models. And Daniel, early on, you guys had a challenge. You wanted to bring the best, at that time we were calling them social entrepreneurs. We'll get to nomenclature here in a little bit. You wanted to bring the best ideas to Boulder, but a challenge was that many of them didn't have the funds to finance it. And you guys had an idea to put the ideas up on the website, early days of crowdfunding. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about that, as well as how did you guys hit upon that idea?
Yeah, great question. So design constraints are what took us to that idea. So we really try at Unreasonable to make every decision, no matter how small or how big, based off of our values. And your values have pretty strong constraints.
I'm sorry to I was just looking at the values page. One of the core values is WWMD, which is what would MacGyver do?
Yeah.
Like that.
Leverage creativity. Yeah. Well, that actually gets to this point. Instead of going to money, leverage creativity. But we had a really big challenge. In early days of the Institute, we were working with about 20 to 25 entrepreneurs in each cohort. And I think in the very first Institute in 2010, I think we had 22 entrepreneurs from 17 countries all come together. And their backgrounds in terms of were they prosperous or not? It was total opposite ends of the spectrum there. We had former child soldiers. We had Moses Sanga. I lived in rural Uganda, had to walk 17 miles to get access to a computer to be able to even apply and then walk back to his village. And then you had an entrepreneur, Mishkin, who had 2 degrees from MIT and was a McKinsey consultant, high flying, that kind of thing. So we had to figure out a way where we wanted to practice what we preach. We tried to only work with entrepreneurs who had a sustainable model around their impact, so financially, economically viable. Whether they were nonprofit or for-profit at that point, we didn't care. We just cared that it could be sustainable on its own. And so we wanted to hold ourselves to the same standard. So how, in essence, do we charge our customers? Our customers are the entrepreneurs. So how do we charge them, but in a way that they don't have to pay, which is a pretty strange design constraint. And actually, Vlad, who's here, Vlad co-founded the Unreasonable Institute, and we had some horrible nights with this crowdfunding platform. It was probably the worst week of our lives. one of them. So this is at the start of crowdfunding. I was actually out in New York. Perry Chen.
I don't recall that Indiegogo or Kickstarter was out there at this point. Is that right?
That's right. So Kickstarter just started. So actually, I went out to New York and met with Perry Chen, who's the founder of Kickstarter. Sat down with him because we basically said the only way we can charge our entrepreneurs without making them pay is to crowdfund. We also then realized that that's the ultimate testament of an entrepreneur's mettle, right? So I think we had maybe it was about 700 applications in the first year. And then we had 3 rounds of interviews. We brought that down to 50 finalists. And then we said, out of you 50 finalists, we want to actually put your entrepreneurial ability to the test. The first 25 of you to crowdfund the cost of tuition, the cost of attending the Institute, you'll get in. And so it was a race, but it was the final selection criteria, which made a lot of sense. Can you convince people that your vision is worth investing in? What also then happened is if you raised funding, like Sanga, Moses in Uganda, if you raise funding from 200 individuals, I think the average entrepreneur is about 150 people finance their way to join, you now have 200 individuals who are rooting for your success in a really big way, who are financially invested in you launching a company that's going to make an impact that you want to make. And so not only did you not pay for it, not only was it a really good test of your ability as an entrepreneur, it also wrapped you with a network of support that you didn't have prior to that. But it was scary because crowdfunding didn't really exist. So when I met with Perry in New York, he had just started Kickstarter. It was the only thing I could find that was like it. Asked him about it. Wanted to see if we could use his code. He said no because it wasn't ready in essence. And so we had to code it. And I think we had maybe like $2,000. Didn't know how to code it, and we outsourced it to some developers in India for $6 an hour. Right? It was probably $6, maybe $6.50, like very cheap. You get what you pay for in terms of quality. And so we put up the site. We have, thousands of people come to it. It was a big moment because crowdfunding wasn't a thing then. This was the first accelerator for impact entrepreneurs in the world. At that point, that was kind of really putting it out there. And so the site got flooded, and probably in 30 minutes, the whole thing crashed. And so that's the first thing. And then we scramble, we're trying to figure it out. We get it back up, maybe a couple hours later kind of thing, send out an apology to everybody. A lot of people are upset, get it back up. Probably 2 hours later, the whole thing crashes. And I think it crashed 4 times. And we literally didn't sleep for multiple days. And it was horribly stressful because this was the public moment. We had over 1 million people come into that site, and this was kind of before crowdfunding. And you'd come and you couldn't make a contribution, or it would freeze, or it would crash. And the entrepreneurs, we had no credibility. Right? The entrepreneurs who were joining us for the Unreasonable Institute were, most of them were more qualified than we were. Right? And so that was a scary moment in terms of doubt. Actually, I take back what
uncertainty.
Yeah, I was like,
Crazy.
We were nervous, very nervous. We brought in, I don't know if Velko's here, but Vlad has a friend who's an amazing scientist and developer from Russia, and brought him in, and Velko stayed up all night trying to figure it out, all that stuff. But yeah, so it was design constraints though. How do we charge our entrepreneurs in a way where they don't have to pay? And that naturally took us to crowdfunding. Because otherwise it was an impossible thing. And one other thing I'll mention is we didn't want it to be not democratic because of your economic situation. So immediately we were like, great, let's crowdfund it. You need to crowdfund, I think it was like $6,500 to get in the first program, just to cover our costs. And we realized that we had what we called the rich aunt or uncle problem. So the entrepreneur has 2 degrees from MIT, coming out of McKinsey. One of our rules was you can't fund yourself. So you can't pay for it on your own. But then the second problem was, well, that entrepreneur in Michigan could just call up his or her rich aunt or uncle and get $6,500. They're in. That's not a testament of your ability to do anything as an entrepreneur, and it's not equitable. And so we made this up. We were like, okay, that's a design constraint we need to solve for. We made it so in the first week, and this is why it all crashed, in the first week, the most you could give an entrepreneur was $10. In the second week, the most an individual could give an entrepreneur was $20. In the third week, it was like $50. In the fourth week, it was $100. And so that meant that if you got into the Institute in the first week, you raised funds from 650 individuals in 7 days. Like you proved to us you should be there. But that made programming really complicated, and it also drove way more traffic. And so, it was a great idea, but we didn't have the software chops to kind of really pull it off. In the end, it worked, but it was hard.
One of the things that I'd like to get your thoughts on is in terms of solving hard problems, your views about where philanthropy is important and what the role of for-profit entities are in solving problems that we think of as, socially, these need to be addressed one way or another. And maybe Eric, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think both Epstein and I probably agree on this, that it's all about how do we create the impact and solve the problem that we're trying to solve. And I try to be agnostic in terms of where the money comes from, as long as the money is going to be able to get you to the impact that you're trying to create. So Educate, for example, is 99% philanthropy driven, and that is truly the best way that we have found, having tried many different things, many of which did not work, to diversify our revenue streams, right? And so, but with Watson, that whole question was extremely important, and it does come down to design constraints because we wanted a revenue model that was truly in line with our mission. So when you're talking about philanthropy versus for-profit investment, I think the alignment with the mission and the impact you're trying to create is absolutely crucial. And what I mean by this is, of all the things that need to be modified and reformed about higher ed, the financial model is absolutely one of them. So the average American degree, $170,000+, full cost, right? So these are 18-year-olds making a decision to pay, on average, $170,000, and that's the average. There's a whole lot that are a lot more than that. It's the largest single purchase of our lives, and yet what's the payback, the return on investment of that is under a lot of questions. So we knew we wanted a revenue model, regardless of where it came from, that was in line with the mission that we're trying to create.
Does that mean a lower price point?
So exactly. So it's two things. It's a lower price point, absolutely. And we do that through a lot of ways. We're a very, very flat, agile organization, so the actual cost per student is reduced heavily. The other way to do this is primarily higher education right now. One of the main sources of financing for it comes from student debt, right? 5 figures of debt is the average that students are coming out with, about $25,000+ here in the US. That's a big burden of debt to start your career with. And what I saw that happen with my peers going through college was that we made our early career decisions based on what would allow us to pay off that debt. Now, those early career decisions really determine a lot of the next steps of our lives, and if it's truly being based off of what's going to allow us to pay back our debt, not what is most aligned with who we are as individuals, then I question whether that revenue model of student debt is truly aligned with what the university is trying to accomplish. So we knew we needed to change something. And so we're about 50% tuition based. And then the remainder comes from a combination of philanthropy and then something we do called income sharing. And we can go deep into income sharing and why it's so important. But what this does is the equivalent of a revenue share investment for a accelerator or an investor. And students agree, instead of paying tuition up front, to share a percentage of their future income for a set number of years. So it's not a loan. It's a percentage of their income for a set number of years. And if after that time they've paid back less than what the original agreement was for, the amount of unpaid tuition, the agreement is still over. So what that does is it flips the risk equation on its head and puts the risk on us. So if you're a student and you take out debt to complete your education, you are assuming all of that risk, right? 100% of that risk, whereas income sharing makes it so that the institution itself is taking on some of that risk. And one of my big beliefs about where higher education is going is that the institutions and groups that find a way to de-risk an education for the students are the ones that are going to come out ahead. Because right now it's like going into a vacuum store, taking out a loan to buy the vacuum when you aren't sure if that vacuum is actually going to work once you get home. We would never do that, right? But that is what this generation is signing up for in a big way. And so we've been piloting income sharing for about 3 years with the help of Bill Flagg in town. And it's been a successful pilot, and we're just now formalizing it into our revenue model. And with the help of Denali Venture Philanthropy and a few other local investors are able to now start scaling out the income sharing program. And our goal is to get to a place where Watson is actually not tuition dependent, but rather we can select students regardless of the financial background that they come from, knowing that our education has the quality and the effectiveness that it will pay off, right? And then we can raise money for our operating costs on the side, not on the side, but initially. And again, the goal here is just about, it's less about where the money is coming from and more about, is it aligned with our mission, one, and two, is it scalable enough to get to the level of impact that we need to reach to solve the problem that we're trying to solve. And so in Educate's case, that was very much philanthropy. In Watson's case, it's a combination of these things right now, and we're moving more towards income sharing for that.
Daniel, I want to tee up for the same question, and we'll open it up to the group. But in terms of your vision of companies that you're working with that are trying to achieve impact, what is the role of philanthropy, and what is your vision of the role of for-profit entities?
Yeah. So right now with Unreasonable Group, we only work with for-profit companies. We decided to focus. That's not because there aren't incredibly impactful and sustainable and scalable nonprofits. Like BRAC has how many employees now?
100,000+.
Yeah, nonprofit has 100,000+ employees and is more effective at what it does than most things. But that's the exception to the rule, is what we found. And so for us, we're looking at entrepreneurs who ideally have high profit business models. But the core product or service that they're solving is very significant in terms of social and environmental ramifications. So we don't use the word social entrepreneur because we think it's a little bit bifurcating. And a lot of people wouldn't associate with that. Like Elon Musk would never call himself a social entrepreneur, and yet what he's doing with solar and electric vehicles is completely transformative. And so for us, we basically say, look, all entrepreneurs design solutions to problem sets. As an entrepreneur, we can choose what problem sets we want to solve. We choose to work with entrepreneurs who are solving problem sets that, if they're successful, they bend the arc of history in the right direction. And if that's baked into their profit model, we want them to be as profitable as humanly possible. So our ideal entrepreneur, like I mentioned, the 89 entrepreneurs, they've raised over $3 billion in financing. And they're really just getting started. The ideal entrepreneur for us is a multi-billion-dollar company, not because we care about the money, but it speaks to the amount of value that they've created. And their core profit model is around solving a very hard social and environmental problem. That just speaks to the scale. So we want a billion-dollar company that impacts 1 billion people's lives and wins a Nobel Prize. In essence, that's like the perfect intersection. And we talked about
$1 billion, billion people's lives, Nobel Prize.
Yeah, absolutely. Triple crown. We haven't gotten one yet. Yeah. But that's the unicorn we're talking about. Like, let's just flip, this idea of billionaire. Why can't billionaire should be an entrepreneur who makes a difference in 1 billion people's lives? Like, let's celebrate that. Now, our belief is that to get there, this needs to be a multi-billion-dollar company. But that's not the thing to celebrate. Profit is not, in our mind, valuable in and of itself. It's a driver towards scale at impact, or impact at scale, is the wrong way to put it. I think for philanthropy, there's a huge role to play, which is actually exactly what's happening with Watson, which is philanthropy, I feel like, should subsidize markets. Watson wouldn't have been able to be started without the philanthropic dollars that have seeded it. Right? But what Eric's saying is in a couple of years, whether that's 2 or 10 years, they want to be financially sustainable off the core business model of rev share agreements, in essence, with their students. Without philanthropy, that wouldn't have been possible to have the time and the capacity to be able to run that experiment. So to me, philanthropy serves magnificent importance in creating kind of the fertile ground for markets to then step in and take over. And our entrepreneurs, they raise both. That $3 billion in financing, I don't know what the numbers are, but I would guess at least 20% of that's philanthropic, even though they're high-profit companies, because somebody had a bet on them before they were investable from an institutional funder's perspective.
All right, let's open up for questions. We've got a Silicon Flatirons tradition. The first question goes to a student.
So you guys solve some really interesting problems in very simple ways, very beautiful, simple ways. I just wanted to ask if there was a problem that you've either thought about your whole life or something that's come up recently that you haven't really gotten to touch yet.
Great question.
You want to go?
You want to start?
Well, I would not to push back too much, but and you'll probably agree with this. I don't feel like we solve the problems, right? Our entrepreneurs do. And just to comment on that, there's an expression, and it's absolutely false, which is those who can't do teach. Somebody coined that, and I rebuttal. I say those who can't do or teach do what we do, which is, we are in essence master conveners, or striving to be, of brilliant people trying to change the world, and then we create the conditions in which they can do that better in the world. So I don't feel like we're solving the problems, other than we're trying to solve the problems of those who are on the front lines. So still a problem. I think that one's very, solve, that's a hard word in and of itself. Like make a really significant dent. I don't think that there's an issue that I've been exposed to where I haven't been convinced through real world examples that entrepreneurs aren't positioned to solve it. And it depends on how far downstream or upstream you go. Right? So we just brought a new teammate into the company. And his name's Josh Burgess, but it's Colonel Josh Burgess. So we call him the Colonel. He's 25 years special operations in the US Air Force as a colonel. And the reason he joined us, because if you look at peace building, that's a little bit different, right? He was a mentor in a program we just ran with the State Department. And this was in July. And at the end of that, we went on a walk. And he said, look, I spent 25 years in the special forces, or special operations. And I did this because I thought this was our best avenue towards peace. He would go into Afghanistan after the US government pulled out. He would go into Somalia after we pulled out, and he'd help set up stability within the local government. He said, but I realized that's downstream. He said, you don't call this peace building at Unreasonable, but you're just upstream. Because if you can solve problems related to education, you can solve problems related to poverty and healthcare and the environment, the amount of conflict that we'll have is so much less. So it depends on how far upstream you're willing to go. If you're way downstream, now entrepreneurship is not the right intervention in the middle of a conflict. To rebuild, absolutely. But I think if we look upstream, it can solve most problems. And obviously I'm biased, but what do you think?
I mean, hats off to you. That's a brilliant question. And I think it gets at the core, I'd probably say for both of us, is why we're doing what we're doing. And I think one thing that might not seem obvious is, yeah, I care about education, but I really care about education because of what education can do. Mm-hmm. So if we take a step back and look at the earth and the current situation and we say, wow, there's some existential problems that humanity is facing. Well, the system that we have set up theoretically to empower the next generation to address these problems is the most obvious answer is the education system, right? And so I really care about education because it gives an avenue to address all of these significant problems, whether it's a climate change related existential issue, the poverty that we're facing, these problems that are going to be going away over the course of this century, which is really exciting. And for me, is like kind of Daniel's saying, I can't decide which one of these problems I really want to dive into, but I know I'm passionate about solving them, and I know that they're all interconnected. Yeah. They're absolutely all interconnected, and education seems like the best way to design a strategy that actually approaches building a generation who can actually go out and solve these problems, right? So it's a little bit of a cop-out to your question, but I think all of these problems I'm so passionate about, and education is a way to get at all of them in some ways. So yeah.
Other questions?
Or criticisms, or confessions, yeah.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Elon Musk wouldn't think of himself as a social entrepreneur. And I'm wondering, when you look at companies or business models, where do you draw that line between social entrepreneurship and not social? Or where do you say, if it's, you know, a really great business model, looks like it's really profitable, it's just not aligning with our values? How do you make that distinction?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes, the revenue model and our mission have to be deeply aligned, right? And that's something that I hold very, very strongly. So with Educate, there's been several times where we've turned down money, we have not accepted donor money because it comes with strings attached, it comes with certain things that we need to implement, and we've made it just an absolute pact as an organization not to do that. And as a result, we've been able to focus down, prove out a very specific model that has results, and now we're in a more scalable place than we would have been otherwise. So I think the mission has to be first. And, you know, social entrepreneur, again, is about entrepreneurs who are addressing significant problems and who are extremely values aligned and have deep, deep integrity in what they're doing. And part of that integrity comes from knowing that the revenue model is simply fuel to accomplish a broader mission, right? And keeping those priorities straight is for me, one of the fundamental building blocks or elements of a true entrepreneur, right? I don't know what you're...
I completely agree. I think integrity is everything. So we don't use the word social entrepreneurs. We actually say we're seeking out entrepreneurs solving BFPs. Part of my French, hope there's no kids here. It stands for big fucking problems. And you know, that could be, right? So, like, look at the future of education, high quality universal education, or healthcare, or water, sanitation, or transportation. What we're looking for is, one, that the entrepreneur's profit model is wrapped around solving that BFP, but two, that the entrepreneur is doing this because they care about solving that BFP. And I think that's the fundamental difference is you can now, I mean, markets are shifting to the point where it's more profitable to get into clean energy than it is to go back into fossil fuels, right? So you're going to see a lot of entrepreneurs who, profit's not a bad thing. What we would say is profiteering is the bad thing, right? And we don't want to align with individuals who are trying to profiteer because they just want to maximize their own wealth. We want to work with entrepreneurs who see profit as a tool towards solving the BFP. How do we decide if it's a BFP? Right now, largely intuition and debate. To be honest, but what we know is, you know, solving illiteracy, like, that's a BFP. Like 707 million people can't drink water, that's a BFP. Like what's happening right now with climate change, that's a BFP. Like there's so many of them, right? But it's a lot of it's kind of debate. We're not scientific about which ones we necessarily solve.
Let me follow up on that. From a governance perspective, you get involved in a company, investors are getting involved in a company. You can pick one that's solving a BFP and it's also profitable. And if the company then sells, how do you retain mission, and what sort of steps are you seeing to protect mission as part of ownership stake or governance right from an investor's perspective?
Ooh, that's a deeper question. You made it harder. I mean, that's a hard question for all founders who go through an acquisition. Especially ours, and that's partially why we want to see the impact in the profit model. So, you know, a company like Tom's, as an example, Tom's Shoes, fantastic company, but they're a one-for-one model, right? Sell a shoe here, give a shoe there, and you could see a world in which they got acquired, and that give a shoe is an expense. Right now, it's in essence, it's a marketing expense. So we wouldn't work with that company. That's angular in terms of its impact. We want the impact core into the profit model so that if it does get sold, if you can take that company to more scale, you're solving that problem more widely. Does that mean that the integrity is still there with the new company who holds it? Not necessarily. I think that that's something that any entrepreneur grapples with, and I don't think that I've seen any, like there's not a formula that solved it other than, do you trust the values of the organization that you're selling to, and can you still have influence or not? But yeah, I actually remember Todd Wolson, he's in the Boulder community, he started Izzy Beverage Company. When I met him, I think it was my freshman year. This is a great example of being a student. Anybody will help you out. And I reached out to Todd. I was like, I have an idea. I want to meet you. You're an amazing entrepreneur with Izzy. And Izzy was fruit juice and sparkling water, no added preservatives, sugar, or anything like that. It's just trying to make a healthy, healthy beverage and a healthy impact. And I remember sitting with him and him saying, I'll never sell Izzy. No matter what, I'll never sell it. And then I think like 4 years later, he sold it to Pepsi for like $180 million. And I remember going back to Todd and being like, what are you doing, man? You said you wouldn't do that. And he said, I was naive because I didn't realize the amount of reach that I would have if I sold into Pepsi. And now Izzy's everywhere. And the amount of people who are benefiting from that product, it's so much more extreme because the health was baked into the profit, right? If Pepsi tried to put high fructose corn syrup into it, nobody would buy Izzy. Right? So it was already baked in, and then it could scale through the acquisition. It'd be really cool if Todd was here, because I don't know if he thinks it was a good thing or not. But whether or not Pepsi had the values that Izzy had, you couldn't sell Izzy unless you kept the values of Izzy in the product, right? Does that make sense? So we select for that in companies we work with.
Other questions? Yeah. Hey, Francie.
Hey,
Francie.
My question is, you all have fantastic models that exist outside our traditional education system. And the question is, if you look at the traditional university system, for example, how can we build in more innovation, more experiential education, making it the value that students are paying for? It's a tough go, as you all know. But if you have any ideas on how we might do that, and then we could extend our reach, right? Yeah. If our traditional universities or secondary schools had more built-in innovation, entrepreneurial education, that kind of thing. So any thoughts you have would be appreciated.
More things like this. I mean, I think actually Silicon Flatirons and Unplugged, Entrepreneurs Unplugged, and everything that's happening out of here, largely Brad, you and your team, like this actually gave me a lot of courage when I was a student trying to launch companies. I used to come to every event here. And so I think that's a big aspect of it, but you're going to have a better answer.
I absolutely agree. And Brad, you're behind so many innovative things on campus. Francie, same way. There's amazing things happening. So I think Francie's question is how do we...
a shout out to Paul Jurdy, who's back here as well from the Deming Center, who
absolutely
is also involved in a lot of this across campus. I'm sorry.
Yeah. For sure. And Paul was and Francie were part of the original committee that helped with the partnership between Watson and CU. And so I think, Francie, your question is, how do we make that systematized within a university, right? And higher education is a really tricky beast in that sense because it's absolutely part of our mission is to create systemic change. So we are not trying to grow a competitor to the current system. We're trying to prove that a model works so that the current system will integrate and adopt that model. That is our ultimate vision. And the same is true with Educate. And we've been able to do that on a national level in Uganda and Rwanda, and the government of Kenya just invited us in for the next 5 years to also help in the reform of their secondary education system. The thing that works in East Africa is that their education systems are very centralized. So there's a small group of people who determine what the curriculum and the exam and the teacher training looks like for the entire country. So if we have the right evidence and the right relationships, we can actually tip the system. And we've been able to do that, right, in Uganda, Rwanda, and now Kenya. Higher education in the US is as decentralized as any education system can get, right? Because each institution is its own system, and within each institution, it's also very decentralized, which makes it structurally almost impossible to change, or at least it will take a long time, right? And so we're still trying to figure out the answer to your question, Francie, is how do we take this model that has amazing results behind it, right? And then start to use it as a platform to leverage systemic change within higher education. But what we do know is it's part of our mission. We think of it as phase 2, Watson, phase 2. And some of the ideas we have around that are packaging our program into easily integratable curriculum and other offerings for institutions to adapt, convening different leaders from institutions across the country so they can witness the Watson model firsthand, and a few others, but there's not a clear answer or a clear path that we've hit on yet. So if you or Paul or Brad, if you have advice on that front, would love to hear it for sure. Yeah.
I like yes, and actually what you're doing I think is the case, because I think this gets back to the business model. The business model needs to have the right alignment, and right now the business model of higher education is a transaction, not an investment. No matter how much we want it to be an investment, it's not. And the business model that Watson's proving out is in essence saying, we only succeed if you are wildly successful in the real world. And once you prove that model, and organizations like Watson can say, look, you can actually financially make more money doing this as a university than charging a transactional price to students. So an example would be, every student who goes to CU Boulder, you don't pay anything up front. We use the endowment to subsidize this. And actually, I don't know how big the endowment is, but let's say it's really big. You don't pay anything up front. And then your future earnings, so long as you earn at least $50,000 a year, we take 10% of your future earnings for 10 years. And we cap it at whatever amount that is. Now the entire university is literally invested in ensuring that you are financially successful, and the business model shifted, and the moment they can show that this is more profitable, then I think universities will adopt it, and I think it's the business model, but it's gonna be a long time. So until then, it's things like this, I think, and bringing the community into the university and making certain that it's entirely permeable and doing what you all did, which is encourage us. Because all three of you, I mean, part of the reason we're doing what we're doing is because of you. You gave us the courage and you gave us the connections and you helped in real ways.
I'll insert myself in terms of over the arc of the 10 or 12 years I've been involved and with partners. The entrepreneurship overlay of you go deep in physics, you go deep in psychology, and you're an entrepreneur squares with what both of you emphasize, which is don't just understand the problem, get off of the PowerPoint, and don't just say it would be a good idea, let's actually get the experience of going and doing that. And I feel really good about the opportunities that we've created for a small segment of CU students. Yeah. But I don't know how many people we touch across campus each year, 750, 1,000. There's 35,000 people here, and what would it look like to do that at scale where every freshman student coming in has a meaningful experience along these lines? That's the kind of thing that would be, really transformative in the next 5 or 10 years here.
Absolutely. It's a combination of the curriculum and the revenue model, right? And that gets the power of the revenue model being closely integrated with the mission, which it currently is not, so we're always fighting against the system, right? Because the revenue model is simply just not integrated. And just to give a quick example, Phil Knight with University of Oregon actually built out a plan with just $60 million.
Who's Phil Knight?
Founder of Nike. $60 million to make University of Oregon tuition-free into perpetuity using an income-sharing model, right? And they didn't do it, which is, they did not do it.
Oh,
exactly.
That's horrible.
But just the fact that the potential was there with $60 million, which is a lot of money, but we're talking about a University of Oregon system, that's actually not that much to make the entire institution tuition-free into perpetuity. So the power of income sharing is absolutely there. We want to prove it out. We have good early track record so far. A lot of coding schools have proven it out. We're just starting to see more momentum in higher education. So Purdue University just launched a large income sharing program with the same partner that we work with, which is great to see. So, yeah.
All right. We'll take one final question before we split. Go ahead.
I don't know if I should stand or sit, by the way. You said that, especially you, I don't remember which one of you guys said it, but that education is a key thing in solving the world's toughest challenges, or even the country's toughest issues. And for me, yes, I agree with that part, but I also believe that the government plays a big role in it. And in a country where, speaking for me with my venture, where I'm trying to get the government aligned to make formalizing job easier in Haiti, since 2/3 of those jobs are informalized. However you would describe what that may need. What advice would you give someone like me on how to get the government aligned to to tag along. I mean, of course, the one thing that is visible is that, hey, you want to create a job, I want to create a job. You want to formalize job, I want to formalize jobs. Let's do this. But that's not a selling point to the government. And that's the dilemma I'm facing with.
You want to go first?
I'll let you finish out. Quick thoughts on that are, I think you're spot on in terms of aligning your metrics with what the government wants to see, and then using something that we call evidence-based advocacy. So you're going into the government with evidence and advocating for them to change something, not based off of an idea or a vision, but with real evidence that it works. And just like you said, the government is, in my mind, a legitimate path to scale. Maximizing revenue, baking the revenue model into a company, reaching $1 billion, and 1 billion people in a Nobel Prize is also another, legitimate path to scale. We've seen with Educate that through this partnership with the government, we were able to completely change the way a generation is being educated thanks to the power of the government, right? And so when the alignment is there, it's really powerful. Evidence-based advocacy, absolutely building those relationships over the long term, and just know that it's a slow process. But when you put the right evidence in front of the right decision makers and align all the incentives, then actually really transformative changes can happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said, and then we've been agreeing way too much. I thought we would have disagreed more.
Save that for later.
But I would just add that when you think about government as government, just how you brand it, right? You call it government. That's intimidating. Right? At least for me, like government sounds like this really big, mysterious thing that's really powerful and complicated, has huge barriers, and I have no access to it. Think about government as a group of people, and it's very different, right? If you said, hey, how do I get a group of people, how do I get them behind my idea? It changes the whole posture. This gets to business is business, but most of anything it's people. So we partnered with the U.S. State Department. We're partnering now with governments all around the world. The way we're doing it is we're not thinking about them as governments. We're finding individuals within the government who share our values. So I would research the Haitian government and find the 10 people who speak the same language you do in terms of what you're trying to achieve in the world. Look at their LinkedIn profiles and see who was an entrepreneur who cared about jobs or whatever it is. Reach out to them as an individual. And if it's the right individual, there are entrepreneurs within every institution everywhere, especially in government. If you get the right person, they can take you there. They can take you through it. But I would make it less intimidating, because the moment, at least I think of government, I'm immediately intimidated. Like there's no access. Individuals, I think you could really do it.
Yeah.
We have that's a great note to end on. We've got a reception next door. What a ton of fun to have you guys here. Please help me thank Eric and Dan.